"Sir, this check doesn't look standard, the paper feels off, and honestly, are you sure it's real?" That's what the young teller said. No greeting, no respect, just suspicion for a 78-year-old Marine who had waited years for that Treasury check. He didn't argue, didn't shout, he just stood there as she shredded it without blinking. 5 minutes later, the Deputy Secretary of the Treasury walked in, and what happened next silenced the entire bank. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. Brookdale, Missouri didn't rush anywhere. It was the kind of town where the sun rose slowly, traffic lights blinked long after midnight, and the same 6 pickup trucks could be spotted circling downtown every Saturday, a place where people still waved at each other from across the street, where the diner closed at 3, and where a man like Raymond Holt could disappear into routine without ever really vanishing. At 78, Holt lived in a second-floor apartment above an old barber shop. No elevator, just a creaky staircase and muscle memory. He didn't need much: a stovetop kettle, a radio that only played gospel and weather reports, a shoebox full of folded letters he hadn't opened in years, and as of last week, an envelope from the United States Treasury. Inside, a check. It wasn't just any check, it was the result of a decades-long fight with paperwork, bureaucracy, and silence. Retroactive disability compensation from the Department of Veterans Affairs, payment for wounds that never fully healed, not the kind you dress with gauze, the kind that sits deep in the bones, quiet and constant. The amount was substantial, enough to replace the roof that leaked every fall, enough to maybe visit his daughter in Oregon if his knees held up. Holt didn't smile when he opened it. He just stared at the paper for a long while, then he folded it neatly, placed it in his jacket pocket, and set out the next morning with the same discipline he'd once brought to loading supply trucks in Danone. He walked 2 blocks, turned right at the courthouse, and stepped into Cedar River Credit Union, same bank he'd used for nearly 40 years, same teller counter, same humming fluorescent lights, same smell of old carpet and waiting. He took a number, sat down, waited. The morning sun slipped through the tall windows, cutting across his worn boots and resting on the soft brim of his tan cap. Holt never wore military insignia, just a plain canvas hat. No need to advertise what already lived in his walk. When his number was called, he rose without hurry and approached the counter. "Good morning," he said, voice steady. "I'd like to deposit this check." The teller's name tag read Lindsay Foster, early 20s, bright-eyed, pushed nails, and a smile that seemed more rehearsed than warm. She took the check without a word, glanced at it, her eyebrows twitched. She turned it over, held it to the light, ran it beneath a small ultraviolet scanner, then her fingers froze midair, hovering above the keyboard. "This is a very large amount," she said carefully. Holt nodded once. "It's from the Treasury, disability compensation approved 2 months ago." Lindsay didn't respond. She began typing fast, her eyes flicked between screens, confusion growing behind her mascaraed lashes. "The paper stock strange," she murmured, "and the routing number. It's not our usual format, it's government issued." Holt replied, "It came directly from the VA." She didn't look up, just kept typing. "Sir," she said after a moment, voice clipped, "do you have any other form of verification?" Holt reached into his wallet and slid forward his VA identification, his Missouri driver's license, the award letter from the Treasury Department. He didn't push, didn't plead, just offered them like facts, like evidence from a quiet ward. Lindsay glanced at the documents briefly, then leaned back in her chair, lips tight. "Bank policy," she said. "We're trained to flag instruments that raise concern." She reached for the phone, but instead of calling a manager like protocol demanded, her hand stopped short, pivoted toward the shredder. "No need to escalate," she muttered. "If it's not valid, we can't process it." Holt blinked. "What are you doing?" "I'm sorry, sir, this check raises too many red flags. You haven't verified anything." "I've seen enough," she replied, her voice a mixture of certainty and mild discomfort, and then, without another word, she fed the check into the shredder. It caught the edge, rattled, and in a matter of seconds, it was gone, torn into confetti. Silence followed, the kind of silence that doesn't belong in banks or on battlefields, the kind that follows something irreversible. Could this act spark an unexpected reckoning? Raymond Holt didn't shout, he didn't slam the counter or demand answers. He just stood there still, hands at his sides, eyes locked on the mouth of the shredder, where a piece of his life had just vanished without ceremony. "That was a United States Treasury check," he said at last. "It was valid and irreplaceable." Lindsay crossed her arms. "If you believe that, sir, I suggest contacting the issuer. They can reissue it, and if they don't," she shrugged, "that's not my department." The people in line behind Holt had gone quiet. Some turned away, suddenly fascinated by their phones. Others looked down at the floor. Not a single voice rose in protest, not one, because what happened to Raymond Holt wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, it was the kind of moment that slips past most people, but not all. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the flag near the entrance, the same flag Holt had saluted as a young man with a broken ankle and a rifle that jammed in the rain. Now he turned without another word, pushed the door open and stepped out into the sunlight, the weight of the shredded check still lingering in his chest like a wound reopened. He didn't tremble, he didn't curse, but his steps, once firm, Slowed just slightly, and that was enough, because what Lindsay Foster didn't know, what no one in that lobby knew, was that the man they just dismissed wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Could this veteran's patience summon a powerful response? Raymond Holt didn't storm out of the bank, he didn't yell, didn't throw a single glance back at the counter where his check had vanished into shreds. He simply walked out slow and steady, shoulders square, hands tucked in his coat pockets and pain buried where no one could see it. Across the street was a small public park, just a bench, a maple tree losing its leaves, and a view of Cedar River Credit Union's wide glass windows. Holt crossed the street with the kind of deliberate silence only age and combat could teach. He sat down on the bench, exhaled once, then reached inside his coat pocket, pulling out a worn flip phone held together by tape and trust. There weren't many numbers saved inside, he didn't need many, but there was one entry listed under 3 simple letters, JC. He pressed call, the phone rang once, then again, and on the third ring, a voice answered. Colton James, Holt said. It's me. A pause. Then the voice sharpened. Ray, what's wrong? Raymond took a breath, measured, flat. They shredded it, he said. Colton didn't answer right away. They what? The Treasury check, VA disability payout. She ran it through a shredder, no questions, no verification, just suspicion and bank policy. Another pause. Then you're telling me a teller destroyed a United States Treasury instrument? That's exactly what I'm telling you. Colton's tone dropped to something cold, lethal. Where are you? Outside the branch, Cedar River Credit Union, Brookdale location. I'll handle it, Colton said. Stay where you are. And then the line went dead. Raymond closed the phone and rested it on his knee. He didn't move, didn't fidget, just stared at the bank and waited. Inside the bank, Lindsay Foster sat stiffly behind the counter, trying to maintain a mask of professionalism, but her heart was racing. The moment Holt walked out, something shifted, something she couldn't name but felt deep in her gut. Now her manager, Gerald Price, hovered over her shoulder. You did what? I shredded it, she replied. It didn't pass standard verification protocols. The routing number looked odd and the watermark felt wrong. Policy says you didn't call me, you didn't escalate. I followed the handbook. Gerald rubbed his temples. Lindsay, a Treasury check. It could have been fake, it could have been real. She didn't answer that. And then before either of them could speak again, the glass doors swung open. 4 individuals walked in, black suits, conservative ties, federal credentials clipped to their jackets. No noise, no theatrics, just authority wrapped in silence. The tallest woman stepped forward. Branch manager Gerald Price, she asked, voice calm and cutting. He stood a little straighter. Yes, Special Agent Rivera, Office of the Inspector General, U.S. Treasury. She flashed a badge. Crisp, real. This is Agent Moss, Office of the Controller of the Currency. We're conducting an emergency audit of this branch, effective immediately. Gerald blinked. Wait, what? Rivera didn't blink. We've been alerted to the destruction of a government-issued payment to a veteran that qualifies as a priority investigation under federal statute. Behind her, the 2 other agents had already fanned out. One moved toward the surveillance server, the other approached the teller line. Agent Moss locked eyes with Lindsay. You are Lindsay Foster, she nodded slowly, mouth dry. You'll come with me now. Lindsay looked at her manager. I didn't do anything illegal, that's what we're here to determine, Moss replied. Across the street, Holt sat motionless until he heard it. Engines, 2 dark sedans pulled up beside the curb, unmarked, government plates, doors opened. A man stepped out of the first car, dressed not in a suit, but in slacks and a windbreaker bearing a subtle Treasury Department seal. Tall, gray at the temples, sharp-eyed. James Colton, Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. He looked across the street, spotted Holt on the bench, and walked over. They didn't shake hands, didn't need to. You okay? Colton asked. Ray nodded. They moved fast. I made one call. Colton sat beside him, not close, not far, the right distance for men who'd known war. I still remember that day outside Basra, Colton said quietly. The convoy, the RPG, your voice calling out through smoke. You were just a kid, you were the reason I got out alive. They sat in silence for a moment, leaves swirled around their boots. Inside the bank, people were beginning to notice the federal presence. You didn't have to come yourself, Ray said. Colton glanced sideways. Yes, I did. Another pause. You're not the only one they see that way, Ray. Like we're outdated, disposable, like service ends the day we come home. He shook his head. Not on my watch. Raymond said nothing, but his jaw tightened. Colton stood. I'll be back. We're going to make this right. Ray just nodded once and Colton turned and walked through the glass doors like a man who had nothing left to prove. Inside the bank, Lindsay was seated in a small interview room, her hands folded tightly on the table. Agent Moss placed a digital recorder on the desk. Before we begin, he said, are you aware that unilateral destruction of a verified Treasury-issued check is a federal offense under Title 18? Her eyes widened. I didn't know it was real. Did you attempt verification through Treasury's direct line? I know. Did you alert your supervisor? No. Did you scan the QR security strip? Run the crosscheck serial in the central system? Lindsay's throat tightened. No, Agent Moss clicked the recorder off. He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, he just leaned forward slightly. Miss Foster, you didn't follow procedure, you didn't verify, you didn't ask for help, you assumed, and now you've shredded a decorated Marine's compensation check, the kind of mistake that ends careers. She said nothing, she didn't need to. Outside the room, Agent Rivera nodded toward the door as James Colton entered the building. Gerald Price, pale and sweating, rushed forward. Sir, Deputy Secretary Colton, I had no idea. Save it, Colton said coldly. Where is the check shredder log? Gerald blinked. That every unit logs timestamped use. We'll pull it along with your surveillance, then we'll talk about staff retraining, internal oversight, and why a man who served his country with honor was treated like a criminal in your lobby. Gerald tried to respond, but Colton had already moved on. Outside, the park bench sat empty. Raymond Holt was gone, but he hadn't left in anger, he left with purpose, because some men don't fight with fists, they fight with patience, and when the system fails them, they reach higher, they reach home, to the ones who still remember, to the ones who never forgot. Inside Cedar River Credit Union, time had started to stretch. Agent Rivera stood at the center of the lobby, issuing instructions with quiet efficiency. The hum of transactions had faded, phones stopped ringing, tellers paused mid-scan, even the coffee machine, still half full, hissed to a stop like it knew something sacred had entered the room. Branch operations are now frozen, Rivera announced. No transactions, no communication, no external access until this audit is complete. Behind her, two agents moved swiftly through the back office, collecting transaction logs, staff rosters, and time-stamped activity from the shredder. The manager, Gerald Price, stood in front of his office door like a man guarding a castle already lost. You can't just barge in here without notice, he said, trying to inject confidence he no longer possessed. Agent Moss didn't look up from the document scanner. Federal Regulation 18 U.S.C. Section 471 covers fraudulent interference with Treasury-issued instruments. You don't need notice for that, Mr. Price, Rivera added. You can either hand over the documents voluntarily or we'll request a subpoena. Either way, we're walking out with them. Gerald swallowed hard and stepped aside, and just like that, 38 years of quiet banking routine unraveled under the weight of a few names, a few decisions, and a veteran who refused to raise his voice in a side office. Lindsay Foster sat across from Agent Marcus. Her once crisp name tag was slightly askew and her fingers trembled in her lap. I followed the guidebook, she whispered. Marcus looked down at a printed policy sheet. Section 12B. Any government-issued check over $10,000 requires immediate escalation to branch management for review and verification via Treasury's secure line. Did you do that? She hesitated. No, she said finally. Marcus leaned back. Did you attempt to verify the identification of the payee? I looked at the ID, it matched. Then why shred it? She stared at the table. I didn't like the way he looked at me. Marcus raised an eyebrow. How was that? Like he'd seen things, and like he knew I didn't believe him. The room went silent. Did it ever occur to you, Marcus said slowly, that maybe he had? The bench across the street sat just as it had before. Worn slats, rusted bolts, quiet shade under a swaying tree. Raymond Holt hadn't moved, not once. His hat brim rested low, his arms folded neatly across his chest. He wasn't watching the bank, not exactly. He was waiting, not with impatience, but with certainty, like a soldier crouched just beyond the tree line, trusting that someone else was clearing the path behind him. The town moved on, unaware of what was happening in their local branch. Cars rolled by. A boy rode past on a bicycle tossing newspapers, but no one paid attention to the man in the plain coat, sitting so still he could have been part of the bench. Then came the sound, a low hum, tires crunching pavement. A second black SUV pulled up beside the park. This one didn't belong to Treasury agents. The door opened and a tall man stepped out, late 50s, dressed in a simple navy windbreaker, no tie, no insignia, but every inch of him carried command. James Colton, Deputy Secretary of the U.S. Treasury. He didn't look around, he didn't hesitate, he crossed the street like a man who'd never lost a battle and didn't plan to start now. Holt looked up briefly, they exchanged a nod. Nothing more, it was enough. Colton entered the bank. The glass doors didn't swing open with a crash, they simply parted, and when they did, silence fell like a curtain. Even Rivera straightened. Gerald Price saw him and took one step forward, then stopped, unsure whether to speak or disappear. Colton walked with slow precision toward the teller line. Each step echoed a little louder than it should have. He passed the counters, past the offices, stopped dead center in the middle of the lobby, then turned. His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Let me be clear, he said, his tone calm, crisp, and quiet. When you shred a U.S. Treasury check issued to a retired Marine, you are not protecting the system. He scanned the room. You are breaking it. A teller shifted her weight behind the counter. No one else moved. You are not stopping fraud, Colton continued. You are telling an emperor of Americans, those who fought, who bled, who waited for their government to keep its promise, that they are expendable. He stepped once more toward the teller line, and when that happens, it's not just bad customer service, it's not just ignorance, it's betrayal, not only of protocol, but of trust. Lindsay, seated just beyond the glass, Heard every word. Colton's voice lowered deeper now. Today, this branch didn't just mishandle a check, you mishandled a man, a soldier, a citizen, and worse, you mishandled his dignity. He turned to Gerald Price. This isn't about policy anymore, this is about accountability. The manager said nothing. No one did, not because they were told to be quiet, but because something in the room demanded it. Colton paused for a long moment, then nodded to Agent Rivera. Finish the audit, he said, and just like that, he walked out. No threats, no press, just presence. Outside, Holt stood up as Colton approached. You didn't have to do all that, he said quietly. Yes, Colton replied, I did. They didn't speak after that, they didn't need to. Colton placed a hand briefly on Holt's shoulder, then walked back toward the SUV. Inside the bank, no one had moved, no transactions, no talking, only the slow sound of an old printer spitting out evidence, and the quiet realization among every staff member they had underestimated a man because of his age, because of his silence, because his medals weren't pinned to his chest, but folded quietly in a drawer somewhere. But that man, he wasn't invisible anymore. That evening, after the last federal agent packed up their case files, after the lobby resumed its unnatural quiet, after the glass doors of Cedar River Credit Union slid shut for the night, Raymond Holt went home. No parade, no news crew, just the soft thud of his boots along the sidewalk, and the rustle of leaves under an October breeze that seemed to follow him like a shadow. The next morning, his phone rang, same flip phone, same name on the screen. J.C. Ray, Colton said, his voice gentler now. Just wanted you to hear it from me directly. Holt sat at his kitchen table, the morning sun filtering through the curtains like faded gold. It's done, Colton said. Full compensation has been direct deposited into your account, verified, logged, and expedited. You should see it already. Raymond didn't say much, just a quiet thank you. There's more, Colton added. You'll be receiving an official letter from the Treasury office, apology included, and a supplemental support grant. Consider it overdue. Recognition for what we failed to do years ago. Raymond paused. I didn't ask for any of that. I know, Colton replied. That's exactly why you're getting it. Then he added one last thing, quiet, sincere. I'm proud to know you, Ray. Always have been. Click. The call ended, and in that moment, Raymond Holt just sat there, hands folded over the table's edge. The money was appreciated, but the call, that was something different. That was closure, that was respect without ceremony, without spotlight, and that was enough. By the end of the week, Lindsay Foster had been formally suspended from her position at Cedar River, pending internal review, federal inquiry, and retraining assessments. Her badge was turned in, her seat left vacant. She never looked Holt in the eye again. Gerald Price, the branch manager, was summoned to testify before a compliance review board. He arrived in a wrinkled suit, left without his title. The bank replaced him with a quiet man from St. Louis, who asked fewer questions and listen more, and the policy manuals rewritten, not just the wording, the tone. It now included one new line on the very first page. Service is not just transactional, it's personal and sometimes sacred. A few days later, a letter arrived at Holt's apartment, hand-delivered by a man in a crisp polo, wearing a pin that read Veterans Affairs Community Outreach. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, embossed. Inside an invitation. Mr. Raymond Holt, you are hereby invited as guest of honor at the Brookdale Veterans Recognition Ceremony to be held on November 11th at City Square. Your service and the events surrounding your recent experience have reminded us all of what dignity, sacrifice, and perseverance truly look like. We would be honored to honor you. With deep respect, the Brookdale Veterans Affairs Council. Holt read it once, then folded it neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and slid it into the top drawer of his desk next to his discharge papers and the yellowing photograph of his unit in Iraq. He didn't need a podium, didn't need applause. He'd lived long enough to know which gestures carried weight and which were just noise. He didn't go to the ceremony, but he did show up to the diner that afternoon, ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie, and when the waitress brought the check, she only smiled and whispered, someone else already covered it. Sir, word got around, not all at once, but slowly. Naturally, a mechanic who once ignored Holt on Main Street nodded. When their paths crossed, a woman at the post office held the door an extra second. Even the kid at the grocery store, usually too busy scrolling his phone, looked up, met Holt's eyes, and said, thank you, sir. No headlines, no spotlight, just a quiet recalibration, a shift in how the town looked at a man they used to overlook, because now they saw him. But the part no one talks about, the part most folks missed, was me. I was there, I saw the whole thing. My name's Arthur Jennings, I'm the night shift security guard at Cedar River Credit Union. Been there 15 years, long enough to know who comes for deposits and who walks in carrying history. I watched from the far corner when Lindsay shredded the check, watched the look on Holt's face, the way he didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He just stood there like something in him had already seen worse, and yet still hoped this world would do better. And I saw what happened after the suits, the audit, the silence that fell over the branch like a Verdict: no one dared appeal. I didn't say a word that day, not because I didn't care, but because I knew deep down that something far bigger than policy was unfolding in front of me. Could this quiet act inspire a town's awakening? And in the weeks since, people ask me, why didn't he fight? Why didn't he yell or sue or storm the news? I tell them he didn't have to, because when a man like Holt walks with that kind of stillness, the world notices eventually, because justice didn't come with fanfare, it came with a phone call, with a line of agents crossing the lobby floor, with a deputy secretary standing beneath the humming lights and saying the one thing none of us had the courage to say aloud: when you shred a check for a soldier, you don't just destroy paper, you destroy the last fragile thread of trust someone gave this country. That stuck with me more than the memos, more than the retraining, more than the new PTO, because here's what I know now: you don't need medals to demand respect, you don't need parades to prove your worth. Sometimes all it takes is one old man, one plain coat, one steady stare, and a story no one bothered to ask about until it was nearly too late. Raymond Holt never asked for attention, he asked for what he earned, and when the world tried to pretend he didn't matter, he didn't shout, he just stood up, waited, and watched the whole system remember. No medals, no ceremony, just one salute from the top and a check returned to the man who never needed it to know his worth. But for the rest of us, it was a lesson: never underestimate the old man with a quiet voice, the steady hands, and a history you'll never understand, especially if he's wearing a plain cap and doesn't blink. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition, some just need to know that today someone isn't going hungry, and sometimes that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Graceful Valor Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.